Welcome back, everyone. In this video, I'm going to do my long-term review on the Hasselblad 75P, which is a lens I've been very excited about since it was released last year. It's quickly become kind of my go-to lens in the system, and I want to get in depth. We're going to look at some images, and I want to talk about that in this video today. So a few weeks ago, I did a long-term review on the 38V, which is another one of my favorite lenses within the Hasselblad XCD system. It was one of the lenses that I took to Japan and used on my workshop that I did there in December, and one of the other lenses that I brought with me was the 75P. I figured between having a wide angle and then something that was halfway between a normal and short telephoto would really have me covered in most cases. I also took the 90V. We'll talk about that in another video. In this video, we're talking about the 75P. Now, the 75P is a P series lens. So Hasselblad state that the P stands for portable, and what that means is it's going to be a smaller lens, much more lightweight. It's usually a lot more affordable than, say, the V series lenses. You don't have as many features. The trade-off there is you don't have as wide a maximum aperture on these lenses. And so the 75P, all the P lenses up to this point have been f4 lenses. This is actually an f3.4. Of course, everything in lens design is like everything else in photography. It comes with a trade-off. To get something, you're going to have to give something up. And so when we have a much more portable design, a much more compact, smaller, lightweight lens, what we're doing is we're giving up that maximum aperture. Now, don't be fooled on this because we are with medium format. We have a bigger sensor, which means depth of field is much more shallow on a medium format camera than it is going to be on a 35mm camera. And we're going to talk about that when we get into images in just a second. The design on this lens is actually excellent. It's pretty simple for modern standards. It is 10 elements in 10 groups. We do have some special glass elements. There is one aspherical element, and we have two extra low dispersion elements. Now, in terms of focal length, we are dealing with medium format. So a 75mm lens on a medium format camera is actually going to cover a larger area than it does on full frame. So the full frame equivalent with this lens, a 75mm, would be about a 59mm. But the way I set this camera up, I actually use the crop modes quite a bit. And so let's talk about what that does in terms of focal length on this lens. For me personally, when I'm shooting full frame, my two go-to focal lengths are going to be 50mm and then some kind of short telephoto portrait length, and it's usually 75. Sometimes I go with a 90. Now, I know that 50 and 75 are somewhat close, but that's just the field of view I tend to see the world in. Now, what's interesting is moving over to the Hasselblad system, we are dealing with medium format, and I mentioned those crop modes, and if you're not sure what that means, basically it means that we have preset crop modes within the sensor that we can get to in the menu system. In the Hasselblad menu system, it has a dedicated icon, so if you tap on crop modes, you're going to be able to select which one you want. And so what I do in here is typically I have this set up for the four that I use the most often. One of these is to have no crop at all, and in that case, the 75mm lens acts as a 59mm equivalent. Now, another one that I use quite a bit, just because it's an aspect ratio that I'm most familiar with, is the 3.2 crop, where it says 24:36. And what this does is it actually crops in the middle of the sensor and gives you the same exact aspect ratio and size that you would have if it were a full frame sensor. So in that case, 75mm is going to be a 75mm focal length. So you might be saying, well, Ted, you're going to crop out all this data. What's the use of using medium format anyway? Well, it's actually pretty cool because you're going to end up with a 66 megapixel image once it's cropped. And of course, if you're shooting RAW, and I don't know why you wouldn't be shooting RAW in a medium format system, it's going to retain all of the data outside of the crop marks. It simply just puts metadata in when you import this into Lightroom or whatever editor you're using, and it won't crop out that data, which allows you to actually recrop the area if needed. One thing that I love about this is if you look traditionally at what Hasselblad's always been about, when they did the 6x6 cameras that were popular for years in advertising. And a lot of the reason why is because people would crop in at the end once you were going to publication. And so it provided more flexibility than you had with 35mm cameras. And so a little bit of this for me brings forward to the digital era as well. It's something that I use a lot. The third crop mode that I use a lot, and I did quite a bit in Japan, is going to be the X-band crop mode. And this reflects the same panoramic mode that we had with the X-band cameras that Hasselblad produced years ago. So the idea was to take the medium format area of that sensor, and if you ran 35mm across it, you're just going to get this long panorama. And it's something that's really cool. And I mentioned this in the 38V video that I did. But the reason that I did this is because when I was looking at a lot of traditional Japanese art, a lot of it is either really long vertical or long horizontal images, and something that really is interesting to me. And I wanted to bring a little bit of that when I was in Japan to the work that I was doing and kind of pay homage to that, so to speak. It's a really interesting thing to try to shoot in, and you'll see in some of the images, the more difficult one for me to compose in is clearly going to be the vertical one. It required a lot of experimentation on my hand and a lot of actually going to look at artwork that used that successfully. It's a very different aspect ratio than what you're used to dealing with standard camera formats. So anyway, you're going to see a lot of images in here that are X-band, and it was just kind of the way I wanted to see things when I was over there. It's really awesome that all three of these are involved with this camera, but my point, back to the 75P, is when you're using any focal length of a lens and you're going to employ the crop modes, it ends up extending what you're able to do without losing a lot of resolution with any given lens. So essentially, I'm able to have a standard focal length and a short telephoto all within one lens and one camera system. Now, another thing that I want to talk about with the 75P is weight and handling. This is a very portable lens in the sense that it is lightweight and it is very easy to handle. The three lenses that I brought with me to Japan were the 38V, which is a very small lens. It's a wider angle. I brought the 75P and I also brought the 90V. And I kind of thought that when I got there, I would opt for the 90V more often than not. It's a V-series lens. It's a little bit longer. It's a great lens, great focal length. And I have to be honest, I really did end up preferring the 75P. And that's not a knock on the 90V at all. 90V is a great lens. We're going to talk about that in a separate video. But I will say, just in terms of a lens that you're going to be practical in the sense that you're going to be walking around with the camera and shooting all day, weight does become an issue. I had a small backpack. I kept one lens in there, one lens on the camera, camera's on a strap, and that's how I rolled. 75P ended up being my go-to for that short telephoto length. So I want to look at some images here, and I want to talk about some of the optical features on the 75P. Now, one of the things I hear most often is people say, well, with this P series of lenses, they're smaller aperture lenses, so you're not going to get the same bokeh and depth of field, and that actually is not true. Now, I know the 75P is a 3.4. If you look at something like the 90, it's an f2.5. But if you take an image like this one, for an example, the point of focus that I have is on the distance here at this man pointing at something on his wife. And this tree in the very front, if you zoom in, you can see it's clearly out of focus. You get an enormous depth of field with this lens. Now, a lot of that is the nature of medium format. You have a much bigger sensor, and so therefore depth of field perception is a lot greater. In fact, I actually have a harder time getting everything in focus when I want everything to be super sharp, even with a 3.4 lens. It's just something that's the nature of the beast with medium format. You're not going to have any problem with that whatsoever. A couple interesting things about this shot that I'll show you, and this has nothing to do with the lens, it's just behind the scenes, but this was kind of this was at the Imperial Gardens in Kyoto, and I was trying to do something that was cool, more landscape-ish, and I wanted to kind of show off that depth of field. And this guy actually walked into my shot at one point, and I thought, I ruined the shot, and I didn't like it. And then I went back later and shot around him, and then I thought, okay, wait a minute, and he did the gesture. And for me, it was kind of the payoff in that shot, so it was something that I ended up going with in the end. Another thing worth pointing out is the size and weight of this lens, especially when you pair it with the X2D. It's not the fastest system in the world, but if you know what you're doing and you're able to work within those limitations, you can actually use this for street photography. I have a bunch of images that I shot. Essentially, these are through windows on the streets of Kyoto. This is a barber shop. I have another one here of a guy next door. He was a cobbler working on a shoe. And these were shot wide open. What the greatest thing about this is you have this really incredibly high resolution image for street photography in the end. So it's something that's very unique. Another one of interest is this young couple by the river. And if I zoom in, you can see just how razor sharp all of this is in here. It really is a stunning lens. And it's one that it became my go-to over the 90V. And that's not to say the 90V isn't sharp, but this one certainly fit the bill. Obviously, this lens works great for portraits as well. You're going to have to get closer than you will with something like the 90V. But if I zoom in here, you can see I'm talking about that shallow depth of field. She's leaning up against a tree here. And if I zoom in, you're going to see that not only is she razor sharp, but that's just right behind her head, and it's out of focus. So you're going to get plenty of out of focus qualities and plenty of bokeh and a lot of that really silky, shallow depth of field look out of this lens. It's not what one would expect from a 3.4 lens, but you certainly have it in this case. So another image I want to share with you is this one, which is an orange grove, which is on the sea. And just to back up a little bit, this is an observatory that was built by photographer Hiroshi Sugimoto. If you're not familiar with Sugimoto, he's one of the finest photographers ever to come out of Japan. He's just incredible, huge influence on me. He has a background in architecture, and one of his projects is he built this observatory called the Anora Observatory, and this is in the seaside town of Odawara, which is just southwest of Tokyo by a couple hours. And this is an observatory, and what's really cool is he has these long path hallways that are lined up with the equinox. So for instance, this one that has glass around it, in the summer, when you hit the summer equinox, the sun will rise right in the middle of this hallway, and there's another one for the winter equinox. It's really cool and really unusual. He also has a series of exhibitions, or the really permanent installations on the grounds. It was built on a former orange grove, and it was really cool. And a lot of this, what I did with the 75P over there is just observing. He has a little workshop shed where a lot of his stuff is, and being able to do still lives in there. I did a lot of these in black and white. The orange groves themselves, it was just an absolutely beautiful experience and a really interesting place to go take images. So I mentioned the 75P is one of my go-to lenses on this system, and I think one would be the focal length, but also the size. When Hasselblad say the P stands for portable, it really is truly a portable lens. Yes, on the 90V, you've got the manual focus clutch, and you've got a depth of field scale, and you've got some other features there, but I found that I really didn't use those when I was using this lens. It's one thing when I'm shooting and I'm in town, and I'm pretty much set up to go somewhere, even if I'm traveling locally, but it's another when you're in another country, you're doing a workshop, and I'm shooting 100 to 400 images a day on one system. You really start to put it through its paces, especially when you're carrying it around, you're doing an enormous amount of walking. And my whole thing is I would stick to 2 lenses on this system when I was out and about. I'd bring the 75 or the 90, and then always the 38V. The 75 ended up winning for my portrait lens. It's a good focal length. The optics are incredible. And when you pair it up with the X2D, you have a system that's not only very portable and compact and lightweight and easy to carry around, but it's something that gives you by far the best image quality and color rendition that I've seen on any system that I've used. Now, you're not going to go shoot sports with this camera. It's really not designed for that. But when you have the opportunity to slow down like I did in Kyoto, and you have the opportunity to really dig in and play with this and see what it's going to give you in terms of dynamic range, I think it is an absolute home run, and it reinforced why I'm absolutely in love with the Hasselblad system. I know that I didn't show any test charts or anything like that. I tend to look at those myself, but they're all theoretical in the end, and what I wanted to do in this video was show you some real-world situation shots that I got that were not theoretical. They're actually the lens in use, and this is a lens that is a favorite of mine. If you have any questions about this, or there's any other lenses on the system that you want to see me review, please drop me a comment in the show description. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.